Despite its financial success for the genre and the passionate fan base that's always frothing at the mouth for new content, me, the fate of the Ace Attorney series has been a very uncertain one for quite some time now. While I wouldn't dare compare the drought fans have been experiencing to something like Pikmin or F-Zero, the last mainline entry in the series turned 7 years old recently, making this current period we're in the longest gap between mainline Ace Attorney games in the history of the franchise. The only game that's filled the gap during this time frame here in the States has been the great Ace Attorney Chronicles, and while those games were absolutely phenomenal, seriously, give them a try if you haven't already, many of us have nonetheless been clamoring for a return to the classic characters and world we all know and love. Despite this, Capcom has held back on developing the 7th entry in the Ace Attorney series, and that's because new players wishing to get into the series had no way of playing Ace Attorney 4, 5, and 6 on modern platforms. For the longest time, the best way to play them was via the 3DS eShop, and, well, we all know that's no longer an option. Other than that, they were available on mobile devices, but that's hardly the preferred way to play for most people. For most game series, this isn't a problem at all, but it's a huge problem for Ace Attorney in particular due to it being a very story-focused series, meaning that it's not a good idea to play them out of order. In less story-focused series, players can skip from Game 1 to Game 5 with no trouble at all, but doing the same with Ace Attorney will leave players incredibly confused and lost, which can lead them to putting the game down and never picking it up again. So Capcom had two choices in this situation. Release Ace Attorney 7 anyways and try and sell a game that only existing fans can really enjoy, or dumb down Ace Attorney 7 to make it more accessible, but risk isolating existing fans. Obviously, neither of these options were a good idea, which is why without the release of Apollo Justice Ace Attorney, Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney Dual Destinies, and Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney Spirit of Justice on modern systems, Ace Attorney 7 was essentially doomed to never exist. And that is exactly why the announcement of the Apollo Justice Trilogy, containing all 3 of the aforementioned games, is so important. Finally, all 6 mainline Ace Attorney games will be available for everyone to play, which is not only exciting because a whole new wave of Ace Attorney fans get to experience these amazing games, and Apollo Justice, but because Ace Attorney 7 is finally a possibility, an inevitability, I dare say. It's been a long time coming, but I can safely say that we are finally at a point where the future of the Ace Attorney series looks brighter than it ever has before. With all that said, the direction that Capcom decides to take when it comes to Ace Attorney 7 is still entirely up in the air. We don't know the slightest thing about what the story will be about, what characters it'll focus on, or what new mechanics it'll bring in. Hell, we don't even know if the next Ace Attorney game will be Ace Attorney 7. But given the fact that the ending of the great Ace Attorney Chronicles was very conclusive, and the fact that Edgeworth's story has been completed for quite some time now, I think I'm making the safe assumption here by saying the next game will be Ace Attorney 7. My point, though, is that anything can happen, which has naturally led to a bunch of theories and speculation within the fanbase. As a self-proclaimed Ace Attorney extraordinaire, I've spent many nights pondering over what I would personally like to see in Ace Attorney 7, and today I'm here to share my thoughts with all of you. In order to do this, I am going to assume that you have at least some knowledge of the older game's plots, though I will try my best to avoid spoilers so that anyone interested in Ace Attorney can watch this video. So with all that said, let's hop into my personal hopes and predictions for Ace Attorney 7. One of the most defining aspects of an Ace Attorney game is its protagonist. It's not just called Ace Attorney, it's Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney, it's Apollo Justice Ace Attorney, it's Ace Attorney Investigations Miles Edgeworth, it's... Okay, this one doesn't count. With both Phoenix Wright and Apollo Justice officially having their own trilogies now, and with Phoenix's name being slapped onto 2/3 of Apollo's trilogy, their stories have, for the most part, been concluded. However, there is still a third lawyer that I think deserves to start her own story for real this time. And that lawyer is... Athena Sykes.
Objection!
Listen, I get it. This take is about as unique as saying that Luxray should be a dark type. But if everyone is saying it, that's probably because it's a good idea. The fact of the matter is that most people loved Athena in Dual Destinies, and that was for a very good reason. She came out the gate swinging as a very interesting character with a well-defined personality and a lot of depth that made you want to learn more about her. Unlike some characters, Athena made a very good first impression and was able to stay interesting throughout the entire game through her relationships with other characters and a backstory that was responsible for making Dual Destinies the only Ace Attorney game with an M rating. Additionally, she was responsible for introducing us to the Mood Matrix, which is debatably one of the greatest newly added mechanics in the series. Utilizing emotions in the courtroom not only made sense in a game about cross-examining witnesses, but the way that it was done at a gameplay level made it complex enough to never become boring. Every witness was unique in how they felt about certain events, meaning that things were always kept fresh. Long story short, Athena and the additions she brought with her were debatably the best things about Dual Destinies, which is why it's all the more disappointing that she was completely thrown to the wayside in the next game, Spirit of Justice. Now, don't get me wrong. Athena had to take the back seat in order to make room for Apollo. This was the finale to his respective trilogy, after all. But even with that in mind, Athena was shafted in Spirit of Justice. She played the role of assistant in the Magical Turnabout, as she tended to do before, but she was barely present in Turnabout Revolution, and the writers were even self-aware of how little screen time she got during Turnabout Time Traveler. The only exception to this was Turnabout Storyteller, a case that was actually entirely her own. And while that's great, the case was so disconnected from the main game's plot that it felt more like throwing her a bone out of pity than anything else. And even then, half the case was spent ragging on her for being a rookie despite what she was able to accomplish in the last game. For how universally loved she was in Dual Destinies, Athena deserved better. Much better. I get why it had to be done, but she has earned the right to be the next main protagonist. It's for all these reasons that I think Ace Attorney 7 should be titled Athena Sykes Ace Attorney. And yes, I want them to actually put Athena's name in the title, because I want Athena to be the sole playable character in this adventure. Because of what I can only assume was a desire for brand recognition and to control the damage that Apollo Justice did to the series, Capcom returned to using Phoenix Wright's name in the title of Dual Destinies. And while that was justified in that game given the amount of screen time that he had, it was significantly less justified in Spirit of Justice, where Apollo was very clearly the protagonist with the most focus. It's been a long time since that shift, and I think we're at a point where it's time to break away from Phoenix Wright as a playable character and commit fully to someone else again. Implementing him would not only hold the game back by giving Athena less screen time, but I think things are different now, and I think Capcom can totally get away with putting all their eggs into an Athena-shaped basket and still sell a respectable amount of copies. Moving on to the premise, I think this game should be all about Athena's journey to prove herself. This is a theme that has been explored multiple times in Ace Attorney, with Phoenix needing to prove his capabilities to Godot at the end of Trials and Tribulations, and Apollo earning Phoenix's respect and opening his own law firm at the end of Spirit of Justice. Despite this, I think Athena especially needs to be able to prove that she can do things on her own. She encountered a lot of roadblocks in Dual Destinies due to her trauma, and she was treated like a second grader in Spirit of Justice. So I want this game to be focused on Athena trying to earn the respect that she so rightfully deserves. To further enhance this theme, I want Simon Blackwell to return as the main prosecutor. This may be a slightly unrealistic wish, as Capcom may want to focus on a new prosecutor to keep things interesting. However, Ace Attorney is no stranger to bringing back old prosecutors in later titles. While he wasn't always the main prosecutor, Miles Edgeworth made courtroom appearances in all 3 games in the original trilogy, and Barrick Van Zeek served as the main prosecutor for both great Ace Attorney games. So if Blackwell was given this chance, I think his character can easily be further explored in a new game, and I think doing so would be a perfect way to complement Athena's journey. As her caretaker from when she was young, Blackwell is clearly very overprotective of Athena, which is especially evident in Turnabout Storyteller as he feels the need to get behind the defense's bench himself to give Athena tips and some friendly strangling. I want Athena's goal in this game to be to prove to Blackwell and Phoenix that she is more than capable of getting things done on her own, while Blackwell can act in opposition to this by believing that she's not ready. This could lead to moments where Blackwell tries to assist Athena in the middle of court, causing Athena to get upset and demand that he not hold back in doing his job. I believe that this dynamic would be the perfect overarching conflict to drive both Athena and Blackwell, expanding on the relationship they had in the previous games, and resulting in a nice conclusion for them both. Athena can learn how to be fully independent, while Blackwell can learn how to fully trust and respect her as a lawyer. As for the assistant, I can think of no better candidate than Juniper Woods. As Athena's childhood best friend and a character that's already been fleshed out more than the average one, I think she would fit perfectly. Her quieter nature bounces off of Athena's energetic one perfectly, and her knowledge as a judge in training would make her genuinely helpful. Perhaps she could be on summer break, or maybe she could visit the Write Anything agency to apply for an internship, before realizing that there are no judges working there, but tagging along with Athena anyways because why not? When it comes to the detective, I could go either way between Emma or a brand new detective. However, I do know who I don't want it to be. I can't wait to get flamed in the comments for saying this. Listen, guys, if anyone likes Dick motherfucking Gumshoe, it's this guy right here. But in my humble opinion, his story concluded perfectly in Investigations 2. So when I see so many fans online clamoring for his return, I feel like they're missing the point. If Gumshoe is to return at all, make him return for a single case. Otherwise, just let the man rest. He's earned it. While I do agree that no one will ever be able to top him, I think we need to be able to move on like we do with Phoenix. Speaking of returning characters that we haven't seen in quite some time, I think there are two in particular that I actually would like to see for this hypothetical game. The first is Winston Payne, which I think is pretty self-explanatory. After Gaspin was completely humiliated in both Japanifornia and Karine, Winston is here to avenge his brother from the crushing defeat that he suffered at the hands of the Write Anything agency. I just think it would be really fun to see Winston in 3D, and I really like the idea of Winston and Gaspin always trying to avenge one another and failing to do so in an endless cycle. This would also just be a great way of showing how far Athena has come already by showing her confidence against Winston in comparison to her encounter with Gaspin in Dual Destinies. The second returning character I have in mind is more of a long shot, but I think it's one that would work really well. Franziska von Karma. Hear me out on this. I think that Franziska appearing in this game could be the perfect parallel to Edgeworth's appearance in Dual Destinies. Much like that appearance, she could return for the final case and do battle with Athena in court. Maybe by this point she would be working as an official Interpol agent as well as a prosecutor, a trait that we started to see in the investigation games. Perhaps the final case can concern an international incident, causing Franziska to step in and oversee the case personally. She could even show up in the fourth case, battling against Phoenix Wright before something happens to Phoenix that causes Athena to take over for him when transitioning into Case 5. I know I said I didn't want Phoenix to be playable in this game at all, but I'm willing to make an exception to that rule just because I think this is a really cool concept. On top of the fact that this would just be cool because, hey, it's a character from the original trilogy, I think that Franziska and Athena would work as perfect opponents for each other. Athena is a character that's all about emotion, from how expressive she is as a person to the fact that her entire gameplay style is oriented around it. In contrast, Franziska is a very no-nonsense prosecutor who doesn't let her emotions get in the way of her work. They're practically polar opposites in terms of their style, and I think that dynamic could make for a really interesting courtroom battle. Her presence would also raise the stakes, as, unlike Blackwell, Franziska has a 0% chance of holding back, making this Athena's big chance to finally show everyone that she's a lawyer worth her salt. On a gameplay level, I'm actually pretty unsure about what I would do with Ace Attorney 7. Since I want the game to focus on Athena, there's no doubt that I want to keep the mood matrix as the main mechanic of the game. However, it's undeniable that a new mechanic will be introduced into this game in order to spice things up. There have only ever been 2 Ace Attorney games to not include a new game mechanic, both of which were asset reusing sequels that opted to build upon and refine the mechanics of the previous games instead. Ace Attorney 7, however, will most likely not be an asset reusing sequel. At least, it better not be. With a gap between releases this large, I would be very surprised if this game wasn't built from the ground up. And as such, Capcom is undoubtedly going to implement a new mechanic. I'm torn on this because I don't want to detract too much attention away from the mood matrix, but I think I have a good idea here. Perhaps between Spirit of Justice and this game, Athena can upgrade Widget, which would add a new element to the gameplay. This could go in multiple directions. New, more complex emotions could be added to the mood matrix, They could give you the ability to use it during investigations, or an entirely new system that utilizes widget could be added. Whatever this new mechanic is, all I hope is that it's not too intrusive and is more importantly, fun to use. I want it to fit into the game smoothly so that I'm actually excited to play with it. Ace Attorney is typically pretty good at this, but I think I'm a little scarred from divination seances, so I'm crossing my fingers that we don't have a repeat of that. When it comes to the types of witnesses that Athena interacts with using the mood matrix, I want Ace Attorney 7 to explore a lot more psychological conditions that the series has not dabbled in yet. Something that I love about Ace Attorney that not everyone always talks about is how accurately it represents a lot of different mental and emotional conditions. I've genuinely learned about a few that I never knew about before through Ace Attorney, and I think that's really cool, to be honest. Seeing as this game will no doubt focus on emotion, I think this is a great opportunity to explore more. I can't exactly list any examples here because I'm not at all educated in psychology, but I'm confident that there's plenty to draw from. Before I close out this video, I want to briefly talk about one last thing. DLC. Under normal circumstances, this is something I wouldn't even bother mentioning. But if you've beaten Spirit of Justice, then you know that there's a certain plot hole that needs filling. So if you haven't beaten the game, go ahead and skip to my closing thoughts. You got 5 seconds. Alright, let's go. So if you're still here at this point, then you know exactly what I'm talking about when I say that there's a giant plot hole. I've made it clear that I want Ace Attorney 7 to focus entirely on Athena. So what the fuck are we supposed to do about this teaser showing La Mémoire finally deciding to tell Apollo and Trucy that she's her mother? I have no idea why she didn't tell them as soon as possible, but that's neither here nor there. My solution to this conundrum is fairly simple. I want to make this teaser lead into a DLC case where you take control of Apollo in Khura'in. The premise for this case is fairly simple. La Mémoire, Phoenix, and Trucy fly over to Khura'in to visit Apollo, though Trucy has no idea what the true purpose of this visit is. Shortly after they land, La Mémoire gets caught up in a murder incident, because of course she does, and it's up to Apollo to clear her name with help from Phoenix and Trucy. This case would be structured much like the Khura'inese cases in Spirit of Justice. Naruto would serve as the prosecutor, and divination seances could even be implemented if they wanted to go the extra mile. Once the case is all said and done, La Mémoire can finally reveal her secret to Apollo and Trucy, tying up that final plot hole in a nice, neat bow. The main purpose of this case is to act as a much-needed epilogue to Apollo's story. I don't think it can be slotted into the main game without feeling incredibly out of place, which is why I think it works best as a DLC case. If there's one thing that Ace Attorney is typically good at, it's making sure that every new entry respects its predecessors and, more importantly, the continuity. There is an exception to this rule, but I'll refrain from ranting about that here. I think that the ideas that I've presented allow for everything from both Dual Destinies and Spirit of Justice to be cleaned up, expanded upon, and resolved properly without seeming like a jumbled mess. And this DLC case would act as the perfect cherry on top to that. And those were my thoughts. What did you think? What would you do differently if you were in charge of making Ace Attorney 7? Make sure to let me know in the comments down below. And maybe consider hitting the subscribe button on your way down. I'll be streaming a blind playthrough of Ghost Trick when I hit 500 subscribers. I've been gathering ideas for this video for a while now, so I'm glad I was finally able to get them all out for you all to see. Regardless of what Ace Attorney 7 ends up being, I'm really excited to see what the future of the franchise is going to look like. One thing I know for certain is that I'll be there for whatever Capcom cooks up on day one. We're about to enter the beginning of a new era, and I personally cannot wait.